I lived in Seattle for 7 years, from about 78 to 85. If you're not familiar with that, that's in the Pacific Northwest. It's on Puget Sound. It is a major port on the Pacific Ocean. A lot of ocean traffic comes in and out of Seattle, and you have to get between Seattle and the Pacific Ocean. You got to cruise the Straits of Juan de Fuca, then you get into Puget Sound, and you go down through these passageways until you get to Seattle. And everybody who does that trip, every ship that does that trip has a pilot. They will come into the Straits of Juan de Fuca, they will stop for a moment until their pilot comes on board, and their pilot will help them navigate through these bodies of water here. And even though you're thinking, well, this is really big, this area is treacherous. There are rocks underwater, there are shoals, there are all kinds of hazards. When you think of tidal changes and things like that, about a bazillion gallons of water are coming into Puget Sound when the tide is going up, and that bazillion gallons of water is leaving Puget Sound when the tide is going down, and so you have these strong currents, and the pilot is trained to know how to do all of this stuff. That's their job. They don't crew the ship, but they do steer it and tell it where it needs to go. And that's described, I think, in this passage as what Christ is going to do for us, and then there's some other things that kind of go along with that. Some motifs from 1 Peter. He mentions in 1 Peter chapter 1, he describes us as aliens on this earth. You know, we're not from around here, we're from around someplace else. We're living here now because, you know, we are, but you know, we're not residents of this earth. Our citizenship isn't here. He also tells us that we have an inheritance that cannot be taken from us. This is crucially important to this book because of the fact that he's really focused upon persecution. How are you going to survive it? There's a key thing that we need to embrace, that our inheritance can't be taken from us. We should focus our hope on this inheritance, and since he's talking about persecution, I added the new motif: respond like Christ to persecution. When Christ was persecuted, how did he respond? And now go do that is basically what he's teaching us here. And from our last class, we mentioned Christ told us if you're in him, you're going to be persecuted. So as a general principle, that's true. In any given situation, it may happen or it may not happen, but it will happen at some point. Persecution is a tool of the world to force us to abandon our faith and conform to the world again. Generally, when somebody's being persecuted for their faith, the option is if you renounce your faith and do what I tell you to do, then we'll be fine. So to endure it, we must focus on our inheritance and not the immediate circumstance. So you got to take the long view on this thing and understand what God is going to give us is better than anything we're going to have on this earth, and he's greater than anything we're going to experience on this earth. Okay, any questions or comments? Let's turn to our reading here, and I'd like to have a volunteer read that for us, please. Share.
For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive by the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in the past were disobedient, when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. In it a few, that is, 8 people, were saved through water. Baptism, which corresponds to this, now saves you, not as the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a good conscience toward God, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers subject to him.
Okay, thank you. So what are our key words and phrases here? I didn't highlight a lot of stuff. The yellow phrase that I highlighted in verse 18, that he might bring us to God, that's where I get the idea of Christ is our pilot. He's going to help us navigate the treacherous waters or fly the plane or whatever it is, whatever metaphor we're going to use. He's going to help us do that to bring us to where we need to be, and he's going to do it safely. I looked at the word prison, not real terribly sophisticated, but it's kind of important to understand what that is. Brought safely through. Saves, we need to understand what the word saves means in this context. The word appeal or pledge in the Greek has a kind of a specific meaning to it. And then through, the word through. So, let's look at our words here. Prison, the Greek word that's translated prison literally means in a cage. We understand this. If you get pitched into county jail, what are you going to be in? You're going to be in a cage. If you go to prison, you're going to be in a cage. Why are you in the cage? Well, I mean, yeah, but I'm not. They put you in the cage so they know where you are and what you are doing, to basically limit your activities so that you are less likely to cause problems and less likely to be, disruptive in this regard. So basically, if you're in the cage, we're not protecting you from us, we're protecting us from you in that situation. The idea of brought safely through, in the Greek, this is a combination of the word dia and sozo, to save. And so it means to save through. Saves in the Greek is sozo, and it means to save or preserve. So when you're looking at words like save and preserve, that's kind of implied that there's a problem or that there's something out here that's going on that is worth being saved from or preserved from. Appeal in the Greek is usually a question or an inquiry, but it could also refer to a demand or a request. So if we're going to appeal to God for a good conscience, what are we actually doing? We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the Greek word for through is dia. Now, think of this word like a water pipe. So you have in your house plumbing and things like that, and you don't want it to leak, right? So you get the water, it comes in from the outside the well or whatever that you have there, and it goes through the pipe to the place where you intend to use it. How many of you have ever had a water leak? Any type of water leak. See, water is a funny thing. It's very contrary. It will go through the path of least resistance, preferably as inconveniently as possible. I've had to fix a few leaks in my day and stuff like that, and it's just irritating as all get out. You think you got it, and then you find out, oh, no, you don't. And go back and have to resolder something or something. It does that. That's what it is. But the idea of three is to conduct it through something. So he's talking about being saved through something. So just hold on to that thought, and we'll get into that in just a little bit more here in a second. So, for Christ also died for our sins once for all, that the just for the unjust, in order that he might bring us to God. He's a pilot. That's what his job is to do here. Having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison. They're caged. They are restricted, constrained, can't go anywhere or do anything. Who once were disobedient when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 persons, were brought safely through to save through the water. And corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, saves or preserves here from something. Not the removal of the dirt from the flesh, but an appeal, a request or a plea or an expectation to God for a good conscience. Through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven after angels and authorities and powers have been subjected to him. So, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention here, and I don't want to go off the rails on this, but there's a couple of phrases in this passage here that people like to talk about, and if you're looking at commentaries and things on it, you will find that they are much discussed, and there's a little bit of difference of opinion on how to understand this thing. I'm going to submit to you some ideas, but I also want to say this. There's no hill to die for here. Okay, there's no reason to fight about it, but I'm going to give you some explanations on this thing, and maybe you'll agree with it and maybe you won't. I'm not going to argue about it. So the first phrase occurs in verse 18 when he's talking about Christ was dead in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit. And so what's the short explanation? Well, after Jesus died, he was still aware of who he was and where he was. He still existed. People have wondered about, well, what happened to Jesus when the Son of Man, the Son of God, when he died? Was he, effectively unconscious during that time period or something like that? I think Peter is telling us that he wasn't, that he was aware of himself, who he was, and what he had done, and all of these other types of things. Again, there's a little bit of dissent and commentaries. I don't want to get in, wrapped up in that. The second phrase in verse 19, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark. That coughing is why I was a little bit worried about being up here tonight. So there are three explanations that I have encountered in my studies through the years and things like that about what's actually being talked about here. First possible explanation is that when Christ died, he went into Hades, or the realm of the dead, and preached salvation to those who had no opportunity to hear the gospel while on this earth. I'm not saying I buy that. I'm saying this is an explanation that's out there in theological thought. The second explanation, Christ's Spirit went back to the days of Noah and preached through Noah to convince that generation to repent. The third explanation is Christ's Spirit entered the Hadean realm and informed them that his redemptive work had been completed. Of the three, the best interpretation to me of the three is that his Spirit went back to the days of Noah to preach to God, to preach to these people, to try to get them to repent. You think, well, why would he do that? Well, what were the days of Noah like? Evil. I mean, it says the thoughts of man was continually evil. And it was so bad that God repented. He changed his mind about, I wish I hadn't made these people because of this. And so if any generation needed to hear about salvation, that's a generation that needed it. And if they were going to respond to it at all, it was going to take some serious preaching to do it. Was it successful? For 8 people, it was. So that's what I think on that. If you have a different opinion or something like that, that's fine. I don't think it's intended to be one of these things that we need to fight about. So, questions or comments? Now let's get to the good stuff. Christ's role in our salvation is stated in verse 18, that he might bring us to God. He's a pilot. That's his job. We have a role to play in that, but Christ is the pilot of our salvation. So going back to the ship metaphor that I started earlier at the class, these big cargo vessels, sometimes they're really large ships and things like that, but you'd be surprised that 30 people on board, 30 crew members on board might be enough for one of these cargo vessels, because there's a lot of automation, or even tankers, or maybe even fewer people there. But the pilot doesn't do their job. The pilot tells them how to do their job so that they can get the ship safely to shore. And I lived up in Seattle for 7 years. They never had a problem with the ship, hitting a shoal and sinking or anything like that. They did have occasional near misses because the weather and climate conditions in the Pacific Northwest are notoriously uncooperative. Fog and things like that get in the way. But the pilot was responsible for getting them there. And every once in a while you might hear something about a pilot who was having addiction problems or something like that, and they took that pilot out of the rotation there, until they got themselves straightened out there so that they would be sane enough, I guess, to do their job correctly without other influencing factors there. So Christ is the pilot here. Another thing that we're seeing here in verse 18 is, what was Christ executed for? What crime did he commit?
Proclaiming he's Son of God.
But was it a crime?
No.
No, it wasn't. I mean, and he was convicted and executed for blasphemy, according to the Jews. And if you read the gospel accounts, they didn't really get all of their ducks in a row on that when they tried to line that up. And finally, they just got fed up and said, crucify him and get it over with. But in terms of any real crime, he did nothing. Was that fair?
No.
Well, maybe if they do it to you, but not if they do it to me. No, that's not fair. To do something to somebody like that just for the crime of being the Son of God or saying that they were and actually proving it. So he didn't do that. And so why was it allowed to happen?
It needed to happen.
It needed to happen. Why?
So that we could make it to heaven.
So he could pilot the ship to heaven with us on it, right? That's exactly what it is. And so sometimes God allows unjust suffering to serve a greater good. And Peter's already talked about that in this letter. Look at the example of Christ. When he was reviled, he didn't revile back and do all of these other things. Isaac?
I see where you're going, but the ark wasn't a navigable ship. It was a floating box. And that's important for the metaphor here because it was the vessel of survival. When the world is covered in water, in death, it is the life that goes through the death. And so Christ, I wouldn't call Christ the pilot because the ark is the thing that which survives through death. I would call Christ the ark rather than the pilot.
Well, I wasn't even going with that analogy.
I know.
I went with the analogy I chose because the Pacific Northwest waters are notoriously treacherous. People have wrecked ships, sank all kinds of stuff up and down, Puget Sound and what have you. Nuclear submarines operate out of that particular area, and so you kind of want them to have a pilot. Basically, a pilot is somebody that knows where to go and how to get there. It happens to be a ship. That guy that's driving, that guy or gal that's flying your airplane, what do they call them? Pilot. Why?
Because they know where they're going.
They know where they're going and how to get there, how to get this thing through that to do it. That's the analogy I was going for.
I think the ark did have a pilot, and that was God.
Yeah. But that's still not my analogy. So, but thanks, I do appreciate it. You're all right about everything you said, but that wasn't my analogy. So back to this. God allows unjust suffering to serve a greater good. So when Christ was crucified, it was completely unjust, and yet it served a greater good, our greater good. So Christ is an example of how to endure this mistreatment and especially persecution and things like that and come out the other side. And sometimes it's helpful to go back and look at Isaiah chapter 53 when you get down around the last 3 verses in the chapter. After Isaiah has said all these things about we esteemed him not, he had nothing really fancy about him or anything like that, but he bore our iniquities and things like that. In the last 3 verses, he is satisfied with what he has done. He looks at the work that he's done and he's satisfied with it. He got his reward, didn't he? So that's another aspect of this thing. Respond like Christ to get the reward like Christ. So he's an example of how to endure, an example of unjust suffering serving a greater good. Interestingly enough, the Roman Christians in the first 3 centuries, after Christ was on this earth, were also an example of that. They bore these horrible persecutions. Once Rome started persecuting the Christians in around 60 AD, they are going to do this off and on for the next roughly 300 years, maybe 270 years. They're going to do this. Somebody will get mad about something, decide to do something, say, we got to persecute the Christians. They couldn't stamp Christianity out of the Roman Empire. And in fact, it did nothing but grow. So did it grow because people thought, wow, these guys are getting persecuted. That looks like fun. I want to get persecuted too. No, that doesn't make sense, does it? Gary?
Yeah,
persecution was the method to spread them, correct? Because if they weren't persecuted, then they wouldn't spread, and then the gospel wouldn't spread.
Well, that is true, and we see that in Acts chapter 8, when the persecution arises in Jerusalem. Where did they go? They went to Samaria and the parts around there, and they took the word with them and they preached it. But another thing that the Roman citizens noticed is these people believed in this God and this Savior to the point that they would lay down their lives for this faith rather than forsake it. Now, there's going to be a few people in there that fail, that do renounce their faith, and there's some history beyond that. But this actually impressed the Romans because from a pagan point of view, they didn't deny the existence of God. It's just that the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, the God of the Christians worship wasn't the only God. So what's the big deal here? You got a God, we got some gods, just pick one and go with it. Why would you sacrifice yourself for loyalty to this God? But people in the Roman Empire saw, they'll do that. We wouldn't do that for our gods and goddesses, or even our emperor or anything like that. And so it caught their attention. And eventually, was around 325 AD, I think it was, sometime roughly that time frame, an emperor named Constantine converted to Christianity and pronounced that Christianity was now the national religion of the Roman Empire. All because of the fact that they spread the word. And it kept growing and kept growing in spite of their efforts to root it out. So did something good come out of that? Kind of looks like it did, didn't it? The word through is an important key to understanding this passage. So if you look in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20, Peter says Noah was saved through water. How'd that happen?
Because he was on the ark. If he wasn't on the ark, the water would have killed him.
Well, that's right, but also,
The water got rid of sin.
bingo, right there. What was the world like before the rain?
Sinful.
Sinful. It was sinful to the point that God had to destroy it. So the rain comes down, the ark is lifted up, it floats around and things like that. And when Noah and his family disembarked from the ark, the world's a brand new place. Everything that could condemn them was on the other side of the water. All of that sin, all of those things. Now, humans being humans, we're not going to allow this condition of being sinless to go on for very long. It's going to crop up again. But at that particular point, all of the stuff that could have condemned Noah was on the other side of the water. So the water had literally taken him through to salvation, to a condition of perfection, at least as far as the earth is concerned. So, yes?
I got a question on the last point.
Yeah.
I was just thinking through. So, as you mentioned, as you got towards the early 300s in terms of Rome, people were moving towards Christianity. And you're saying that was due to persecution happening and those in society seeing that was what was really driving them, I guess, towards Christianity.
The Romans had a tendency to want to respect power. And so, now not everybody's in the same mindset, but there were people who noticed that these people believed in this God and his son so fervently that they would die for it rather than switch. Because if coming from a pagan background, if I have 15 gods and you've got one, I can just as easily have 16 gods now.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
My question is more so, did those people see maybe moral decay in society? Because late stage Rome had a lot of moral decay. Was that also driving them towards Christianity, or was it just purely, in your perspective, the persecution that drove them to want to go and learn about Christianity?
I wouldn't say the persecution by itself or their response to it by itself did that. I think it's a combination of factors. Number one, the Christians in that time period were very evangelical. I mean, they were spreading the word everywhere that they went. And one of the things that I think was mentioned earlier, Gary mentioned, did you mention it? The idea of when persecutions happened, that Christians scattered, but they did take the word with them wherever they went. And it did change their behavior and the way that Christians related to their neighbors. You read the New Testament and you see new Christians have lots of problems. I mean, but they have to outgrow it, and they do so quite successfully, I think, in the most part. Gary?
At this point in time, there very well could have been like spiritual gifts too, correct?
There were, yes. When Peter's writing this, there are spiritual gifts,
Well,
yeah,
that
the
doesn't- I mean,
miracles.
that helps the cause if a fellow's coming in and a guy's blind his whole life and all of a sudden he can see. I mean, that would probably change my mind pretty quick.
I would think that it would change mine too, but bear in mind that it did not change a lot of people's mind.
Yeah.
Even the Pharisees said, we can't deny that the miracle happened, but we still got to kill this guy.
It didn't hurt though.
Yeah, I mean, to the mind that discerns, this was significant.
Yeah.
People were asking the question in the Gospels, when the Messiah comes, will he do more than this guy's already doing right now? So it's not like one thing that you can sit there and say that this one thing was the thing that caused everybody to want to convert to Christ. And realistically, not everybody wanted to anyway, even at that time. The majority of the world did not become Christians. But those who did would have done it based upon the word, the teaching, the faith of the people around them, the miracles, and all of these other things that they experienced. That's what it was all done for. Do you have a hand up?
I kind of see a correlation with the Charlie Kirk deal, and then since his assassination, there's been an upsurge and a resurgence of interest in what he was preaching and teaching. It's like he was persecuted, but now people are interested and they're wanting to hear, they're wanting to learn more about Jesus and that. So.
Yeah, I never actually heard of him until he was assassinated.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I haven't looked at anything he said, but he didn't deserve to be assassinated just because of what he, just for that. Let's continue on here a little bit. So according to Peter, baptism is important to our salvation. And why is it? What's on the other side of baptism? Sin. So baptism is the thing that floats us through to get us to this particular point. And again, will we have sin problems? If we say we have no sin, we make him out to be a liar. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, then the blood of Christ cleanses us of all of our sins. So it's not like it's gone away, but we're in a different state. That's what he's saying. Peter's just making that kind of an analogy here. When we become a Christian, we become, according to Romans 6:4, a new creature. Something new. And 2 Corinthians 5:17, we're cleansed from those things. The other thing that to keep in mind here was Christ rewarded for his sacrifice. I mean, that was about as brutal a way to kill a human being that you could do. Humiliating. Painful. Some people hung up on a cross for, 7 or 8 days before they finally died. That type of agony is but he was rewarded. And like Isaiah said, he looks at the work he's done, and he's satisfied with it because he knows he's done the will of God, and we're his reward. Questions or comments? So, Noah was saved through water. Christ is our pilot. He's going to get us there. Noah was saved through water. We are saved through baptism and the resurrection of Christ. Both of those things are part of our salvation. Both of those things are the pipe, if you will, that we're going to go through to get into eternity with God. God may allow us to experience suffering to further his purpose, and this includes persecution. But God always rewards his children when they suffer unjustly. Serve God, you're going to get a reward. Sometimes it feels kind of icky to me to talk about that. Well, you know what? I used to work for a living, and I enjoyed what I did, but if the paycheck dried up, I didn't do it anymore. Does that make me a mercenary? Yeah, Okay, maybe it does, maybe it does. But there was always a purpose in there. I'm finding joy in what I did, but I still had to get paid. And I was okay with that. And if they ever offered me, I never one time in my career turned down a raise. I don't know of anybody that ever did. I did actually do know of one guy that did. But he didn't take more money, he just wanted a big vacation. And so that's what he did, is he went on a big vacation. So he took it too, just a different way. God always rewards his children when they suffer. He always rewards his children when we serve him. And that's, the circumstances that we are in, hostile, calm, whatever, doesn't change any of that. So that's the lesson to take from this thing. So now, this is what Christ went through. When you're going through something like that, do what he did. Really what it's going to boil down to.
The sad truth is that every time God sheltered his people with peace, they walked away from him. Every time there was hardship, they clung to him.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yeah, it is.
It's so true, and God knows it.
Yeah, reign of Solomon. Silver was like water, and what did they do? They went and started worshiping idols and things like that because life was good and they could take care of themselves, or at least they thought they could. That's a good point. Anything else? I made it.
Only one call.
So, then next 2 Wednesdays, we will not be having class. We're not having any class at the building. We will be having assembly. But because of the fact that it's Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve on the next 2 Wednesdays, and we have a lot of trouble finding subs and things like that for our children's classes, and people, a lot of our teachers are raising children and involved in holiday activities. We're going to meet and we'll have a get-together here at the building. We'll have some songs and a devotional service and things like that, but no class for the next 2 Wednesdays. Unless something's changed that I don't know about. Remember, we've got to take all the chairs out of here tonight, so.
This was